joining us, guys. We're planning on being live for about half an hour with Lucy to answer any and all of your weaning questions as part of Bibado's big Weaning Week activity. So, Lucy, we've had a bunch of questions come in from some of our followers already, and also from the Big Messy Lunch event that we held yesterday. Some of the people there sent in questions. Yeah, that was awesome. Really, really fun day. So yeah, lots of questions. I think we should try to keep it as concise as we can, because I'm sure, well, I know you and you know me, and we can talk about this stuff all day. So I'll try and keep it to practical advice as much as we possibly can, guys, to keep it relevant. So to dive straight in, the first question we have, I'll go with two questions kind of joined together because they're kind of very much related. So Abby has asked, how do we convince toddlers to eat veggies? She had them all the time with weaning, but now won't touch them. Peas used to be her favorite food. And Joe's 17-month-old won't eat pasta, savory meals, mashed potato, really fussy. She has to sneak veg into banana pancakes and other fritters, won't even attempt to eat them. So this is a 17-month, again, really good eater, really adventurous during weaning, but then struggling afterwards. Really common question we hear all the time. What would you say?
All the time. Okay, so brief bit of science and context. You haven't done anything wrong. Lots of parents think, oh my God, why have we made this sort of U-turn in how my, toddler is eating when my baby ate anything? I always say to parents during weaning, we're primed for developing, learning how to eat, learning lots of skills, but also being very receptive to different tastes and textures. After 1 and into the toddler years, we get this lovely, but quite unhelpful for some parts, developmental thread pushed through where kids actually don't need as much energy anymore to grow and to develop. They want lots more autonomy and independence, and food is a very low-hanging fruit for kind of asserting some autonomy around. And we also have this lovely kind of food neophobia streak, which we can thank kind of the caveman era for. It's actually a lovely survival mechanism, right? Of you have a very impulsive, independent toddler all of a sudden who can take risks. We don't want risks that would be life-threatening, such as going and eating the poisonous berries outside the cave or the rotting carcass. So actually, children become almost wired to be very overcautious. That sort of alert system in their brain is very overcautious around food. So it's very common for children to go off mixed dishes, kind of protein-rich foods, vegetables, things that are not as predictable every time. So whether like beige food, things that are more samey, fruit which is sweet, and we all know is sort of safe because it's sweet. So what I always say is what we want to do above all else, if I was to give you kind of 3 tips, 1, dial down any kind of pressure. With a child who's developing a lot more sense of autonomy, they're going to really dislike feeling like they're having that taken away. So we can focus on what we can do at meal times in terms of role modeling and perhaps talking about our own food and eating with them. But we don't want to sort of be trying to make them eat, sort of hanging it around their face or asking them lots of questions or, using food like a hierarchy, saying, well, if you do try your peas, you'll eat this. What we want is lots of low level, low stress, repeated opportunities to learn about that food. And I would say we're kind of like that's weaved into 2 things. But the third tip I would say is to try and make the mealtime and the food fun. Kids at that age are wired to like play, silliness. And actually, if we can do that with food, children can sometimes be quite perceptive and be like, oh, okay, I'm now interested in this because you're not telling me it's good for me or that you like it. You're saying this is a little train, this looks like Bluey's nose, whatever it might be. And they're far more likely to be curious about what you're doing. But for the most part, parents have to strap in for kind of months where feeding might be like this, and that's okay.
Fab. Thanks, Lucy. We've had a question come in from another Abby, who's live on the stream here, who's asked, when babies turn 1, how often should they be having whole milk? They're currently breastfeeding alongside weaning after they turn 1.
Yeah, great question. A lot feels like it happens at 1, doesn't it? So just to say, if you're still breastfeeding your baby, they don't necessarily need to drink whole milk. What we tend to say, we kind of tend to look at volumes and portions of dairy overall, because too much milk, particularly sort of cow's milk at this age, can deflect nutrients from other places and reduce appetite. So I tend to say no more than around 350 mils of like whole milk a day, considering that you might also put that in things like cereal or porridge, but that can also translate to almost sort of 2 to 3 portions of dairy a day. So kids, it can feel like quite a shift from a very sort of predominantly milk-based diet to actually, we don't want them necessarily having loads of milk. What I'd say about breastfeeding is you can keep breastfeeding responsively.
Amazing. Thank you. Abby, if you could give us a thumbs up if that's covered your question, that'd be fab. Um, so a couple of questions there from slightly older kids. So I'm going to switch it over to like the earlier end of weaning, kind of 6 to 8, 9 months. One of the questions, or a few of the questions that we've had in along a familiar theme that Lucy, you will have heard 1,000 times. We get it all the time. Children just not interested in food, not showing a massive interest in weaning. And from my experience, speaking to a load of parents, babies seem to be split pretty much 50-50 down those that will just pile in at meal times and go for absolutely everything versus those who, same upbringing, same experience, same environment, everything else, but just seem far less interested in food. Parents get really, and I speak from experience here, get incredibly frustrated, kind of prepping all this food, serving all this food to their kids, and they sit there looking at it and not doing anything with it, sometimes for weeks on end, months on end. Your advice, please, Lucy.
Yeah, firstly, just to say that I know that that's hard. My daughter did a similar thing. About 8, 9 months, I was like, are we making any progress here? I had a little moment of self-doubt, having been very relaxed almost up until that point. And it can feel quite fruitless when we're focusing on children, sort of that the goal might be eating and volumes getting in. And I agree with you, actually, that what we do see is several sort of camps with babies, the ones who seem to go all in and be quite food responsive and into eating almost from day dot, and then children who follow a very different trajectory, and actually the penny drops for them, or it all seems to knit together closer to sort of 9, 10, 11 months. There is no right or wrong. And I think the way I always sort of frame it with families is that, much like any other developmental milestone, we need to be quite accepting of the fact that weaning is learning to eat, and babies are going to hit sort of progression with that at slightly different rhythms and paces. And that is okay. There is no way of rushing it through. And, we very much accept babies who walk. Some of them walk before 1, and some of them take till sort of 18 months, sometimes even closer to 2. And we have a window of kind of normal, I suppose. And I'd very much like the same to be applied to weaning, particularly when you're looking at actually how much time has been involved in learning to eat. It is the most complex skill your baby will learn. And I can categorically tell you that. There is not much else that involves all of the motor systems, fine motor systems, what we would call sensory integration, so learning about all the different sort of sensory elements of eating, postural stability, and a million other things. So what I would say is sometimes reframing the not eating very much, not interested kind of as being pointless isn't going to help you in the long run. What I would focus on generally is actually, do you know what? My job is to keep providing opportunities here. I've provided loads of great sensory rich opportunities, and that will be being quietly tucked away. It's not pointless. You just haven't kind of seen the fruits yet. So please don't feel too demoralized. I promise almost all children land and they get there. They just get there when they're ready. I would also say, if you're finding kind of waste an issue, start with putting a lot smaller on their plate, and spend some time making sure that at meal times kids know what they've got to do. It can be easy to think, as I've said, that eating is just this thing you get, and we do. It isn't. They've got to learn it. And so many children escalate and improve very quickly when we start sitting down with them every meal time and showing them what to do and modeling all those skills that you need to eat.
Amazing. Thanks, Lucy. And it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I've been through it myself. I've been through it with my my nephew as well, kids that are less engaged at meal times. And it can be so frustrating as a parent when you're doing all of this effort, working for a weaning company as well. When it feels like you're really failing at weaning yourself is not great. I'm sure you felt similar with A. There's
it's
that added pressure.
Emotions. All of that. And I think also to please remember that sometimes when you feel like something's not going well, what we all do is focus on all of the children around us at the same time doing really well. And it will just make you feel even more of a failure. You're not a failure. You're not doing anything wrong as a parent. Your baby's just moving at a different pace and a different rhythm. And I think I think I'd just strap back into let's keep offering, let's keep providing that opportunity, let's keep showing her what to do and kind of trust the process. What I would say is if there are any sort of red flags, so you've got a baby who's sort of persistently vomiting, not sort of getting quite distressed, often we'll see like a sort of stressed hands getting out, moving out of the way, getting very upset at meal times, or, if they're constipated or you're worried about allergies or anything else that might be affecting that feeding experience, then do go have a chat with somebody who can sort of pick it apart a little bit more with you.
Thank you. And is there any link? This is just off the top of my head, but I was wondering about this the other day. I was with a friend who's just starting weaning at the moment, and they were talking about, whether they should start now or in a couple of weeks' time. Their baby was, I think, 6 months plus or minus a couple of days.
Yeah.
And when we were discussing it, it didn't seem like they were quite ready. And I do wonder sometimes whether there's a link between people starting too early and their kid not quite being ready for food, and it's how ready their kid is to get involved, and then potentially that lag taking them longer to catch up. Whereas if you wait that little bit longer, make sure they're absolutely ready when they sit down, you're giving them a better chance of getting stuck in straight away, and then that momentum building.
Yeah,
Is that something that you find?
I think that developmental readiness is so important and isn't to be undervalued, because that's and babies will reach it at 5.5 months, 6 months, 6.5 months, again, because there's going to be different trajectories here for each child. And actually, the reason we have those developmental milestones that we look for is to give your baby the best chance with sort of grasping all those skills and starting to knit all those skills together that they're going to need to eat, and to learn about food. So there is, I cannot stress enough, please don't just watch the clock, watch your baby.
Absolutely. It's not a hard and fast 6 months. It doesn't mean, they're 6 months where you've got to dive straight into food. Just the most important thing, making sure they're actually ready for it. And kids are going to be ready at different times, and not everybody's going to be ready at the same day.
100%. And I see premature babies, right, who, their actual age and their corrected age are very different, and we would still be looking for those same things. We'd be like, how is this baby ready to get going with solids?
We've got a couple more questions that come in through the feed. Hannah Jane, my son is allergic to dairy and soy. He's refusing oat milk unless it's in a bottle.
Yeah.
But we've removed bottles as he's now 2. How can I ensure that he's getting enough calcium in his food?
Okay, sure. So what I would say is calcium requirements often aren't as high as we might anticipate at sort of 2. We're sort of looking at about 350 milligrams a day. So if he will have oat milk, kids do not need to drink milk alternatives. Just like I said, they don't need to drink dairy to get the calcium they need. If he will have oat milk in things like, or a fortified milk alternative, in porridge, in cereal, if you use it to cook to make like oat bars or anything like that, even dairy-free custard with a dairy-free custard powder, that will all count. And about sort of 100 and 120 mils of that will be at least one portion of his sort of calcium requirements for the day. I would then say look for some of your dairy-free yogurt alternatives that are also fortified with calcium. There's some good ones out there. A little pot of that would be easily a second. And then you can look for other, there's lots of other foods away from the dairy alternatives that actually do provide calcium too. So there's, fortified oats and fortified cereals, lots of bread, and bread flour naturally, if it's white, will contain added calcium in it. And you have some brands that add even more calcium in there. Things like oranges, pita bread. If you've got a child who does like their oily fish, and they would go for something like sardines or some kind of fish like that, that's perhaps even blended in a pasta sauce, there's loads of calcium in the soft bones that are in that sort of fish. Tahini's another great sauce, so sesame paste. Brilliant. You can use it as a dip with things. You could mix it into dairy-free yogurt. I use it in baking all the time just to add sort of a more savoury, nutty edge. So most of the time, children are okay with calcium. I would tell you that much. What I would say is don't forget about other important nutrients like iodine. So dairy is most children in the UK's main source of a big nutrient for their development called iodine. If you've got a dairy-free little one, I would look for an iodine-fortified milk alternative. And I always say to my families, try and make sure you get in some white fish once a week.
Cool. Thank you, Lucy. On allergens, you've got a few more questions on allergens. I think it's a topic that parents are naturally quite anxious about when it comes to weaning. So actually, I'll start with a simple one, and then I've got a slightly more complex one from a lady I met today. So simpler one, once you've safely introduced allergens, how often is it recommended to keep them? That's from Sophie.
Yeah, great question. So for anyone who's worried about allergens and thinking, I just want to get them in, I cannot stress enough the importance of continuing to remind the immune system that this food is safe. And that the way we remind the immune system is by telling the cells of the immune system that live in the gut, because the immune system cells that live in the gut are primed to label foods that reach there as safe. So when you look at sort of, if I was to look very scientifically, often we'll say 2 to 3 times a week for some of the main allergens like peanut or egg. Pragmatically, and you know me, Dan, I'm very pragmatic, I would be trying to get sort of most of the major allergens in at least once a week. Some of those are going to be easy. Wheat kids may well be having daily, eggs kids may well be having daily, peanut butter maybe, actually a few times a week. You might have to be a bit more intentional with other things like, almonds, tree nuts, that sort of side of things. But I really want to reassure you, if you end up skipping a few weeks, that's almost certainly going to be fine.
Thank you. And then the more complex one. So Hayley, this fabulous lady that I met yesterday, has suffered with allergies her whole life, really extreme nut allergies, along with allergies to fruit and veg.
Yeah.
She's now weaning her daughter, and having to combat trying to introduce allergens to her daughter while keeping herself safe. Her daughter's now 9 months old, and because of her own allergies, she hasn't yet introduced nuts particularly to her daughter. She's asking, has she missed the window? She's been bounced back and forth between the doctor and the health visitor, sent them back to the doctor again, trying to get advice. But
Okay.
yes, anyway, has she missed the window? What can she do when she's allergic herself to safely introduce allergies to her baby?
Sure. Top line, not miss the window. Obviously, we want to get going sooner rather than later, but you still got a little one with a very kind of labile developing immune system. So you've not missed the window. Looking after yourself, you have to be really pragmatic here. And obviously what I don't know is the sort of full history in the background from kind of mum's allergy perspective. I have lots of parents who have food allergies who do safely introduce other allergens at home, as long as they are taking precautions to make sure they don't ingest that allergen. So, where possible, we lean on other people who are not allergic. We ask nannies, granddads, aunties, uncles, partners. In terms of keeping safe, some families will have, nut-free zones because of someone in the house who is allergic. There will always be a degree of risk as soon as you start introducing those foods if you choose to at home. What I would say is we look to just moderate that risk as much as possible if you decide to go ahead. So we would be thinking about what foods would we put it in that might not make a wild amount of mess. So I might, actually put peanut butter on toast rather than, porridge that might go everywhere. I would also be thinking about how we're going to make sure we're really careful about cleaning up, cleaning down. This is where something like your coverall bib is actually brilliant, because you can, if you know that most of their clothes are really well covered and you can whip it off and put it straight in the washing machine on a hot wash, then actually you're not having to necessarily replace clothes every time. Your baby will need a really good wipe if they've got food around their mouth, hands, etc., which they will. So just, warm soapy water should be fine. And then if you're keeping any of your allergens in the house because you are offering those, thinking about how you do that so you avoid cross-contamination. I have families who have like allergen kind of shelves like right at the top, out of the way of all of the other foods. They might put things in Tupperware, seal things off, just to try and avoid any cross-contamination, especially if your cupboards look like mine where things go carnage and everywhere. So it's we cannot reduce the risk to zero, and it would so depend on what kind of sort of history that the parent had. Sometimes we do just have to rely on it being done elsewhere at somebody else's house consistently if there is an opportunity to do that.
Thanks, Lucy. All right, another question here from Samantha. Her son is 18 months old. Sometimes will happily not eat anything at all. He eats really well outside the house, restaurants, family. It seems to be mainly at home that there's this problem. Any advice there?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing so just to say, it's very common for there to be context-specific differences in children's eating. Like if I had a pound for every parent who's come to me and said, I don't know why they eat everything at nursery. I mean, I do, when you think about routines and how many models they've got in their peers and the time, even the time of day, right? They get our kids at the best time of day in the morning through lunchtime, and then we try to do the tricky evening meal at home. So what I would say is, if it's at home, does kind of the routine and the mealtime environment need a little bit of a shake up? So, is there a way to make it more fun to come to the table? Are we being really predictable? Kids need predictability at this age. They don't know what daytime it is or what they're doing next. So a clear sort of beginning, middle and an end of a mealtime. Are there elements of enjoyment for that child? And actually mealtimes for lots of children are very rarely just about eating by that age. They want to reconnect with you. They want to see you eating. They want to be around others. Lots of us are social eaters, right? We prefer to eat with someone rather than just on our own. So I would probably look at the mealtime environment, but also be very kind to yourself and ask yourself, am I also getting predominantly meals at the most tricky time of day when children are tired, dysregulated, and all those sorts of things? Because, you know, at this age, it's not uncommon for children to skip whole meals. And I always frame eating at this age as, you know, meal times and snack times are opportunities to eat, not guarantees children will.
Yeah. Thank you. I've got a really interesting one that's just come in from, I think it's Charlotte. So,